how we feel when doing different things. The quality of life depends on what we do in the 70 or so years we are allotted, and on what passes in consciousness during that time. Different activities typically affect the quality of experience in rather predictable ways. If all through life we only do depressing things, it's unlikely that we will end up having lived a very happy life. Usually, each activity has both positive and negative qualities. When we eat, for instance, we tend to feel a more positive effect than usual. A graph of a person's level of happiness during the day resembles the profile of the Golden Gate Bridge across San Francisco Bay, with the high points corresponding to mealtimes. At the same time, mental concentration tends to be rather low when a person eats, and one rarely experiences flow. The psychological effects of activities are not linear, but depend on their systemic relation to everything else we do. For instance, even though food is a source of good moods, we cannot achieve happiness by eating around the clock. Meals raise the level of happiness, but only when we spend around 5% of our waking time eating. If we spent 100% of the day eating, food would quickly cease to be rewarding. The same is true of most of the other good things in life. Sex, relaxation, television watching, in small doses, tend to improve the quality of daily life considerably, but the effects are not additive. A point of diminishing returns is quickly reached. Let's take a very condensed view of how people typically experience the various components of their daily life. As we would see, when adults work or when children do schoolwork, they tend to be less happy than average, and their motivation is considerably below normal. At the same time, their level of concentration is relatively quite high, so their mental processes seem to be engaged more than they are the rest of the day. Surprisingly, work also often produces flow, presumably because challenges and skills tend to be high when working, and goals and feedback are often clear and immediate. Of course, work is such a broad category that it seems impossible to make an accurate generalization about it. In the first place, it makes sense to think that the quality of experience when working would depend on the kind of job one has. A traffic controller must concentrate much more on his job than a night watchman. A self-employed entrepreneur presumably is much more motivated to work than a clerk in a government office. While this is true, the characteristic signature of work persists despite the very real differences. For example, the experience of managers when they are on the job resembles that of assembly line workers much more than it resembles their own experience when they are at home. Another problem of generalizing about work is that the same job will have many aspects that are experienced differently. A manager might love to work on a project but hate to sit in conferences, while an assembler might love to set up a machine but hate to take inventory. Nevertheless, it is still possible to talk about the distinctive quality of the work experience in comparison with other general activity categories. The more it resembles a flow activity, the more involved we become, and the more positive the experience. When the job presents clear goals, unambiguous feedback, a sense of control, challenges that match the worker's skills, and few distractions, the feelings it produces are not that different from what one experiences in a sport or an artistic performance. Maintenance activities are quite varied in terms of their experiential profile. Few people enjoy housework, which tends to be generally negative or neutral along all dimensions. If one were to look at in finer detail, however, it would turn out that cooking is often a positive experience, especially compared to cleaning the house. Personal care, such as washing, dressing, and so forth, is usually neither positive nor negative. Eating, as mentioned earlier, is one of the most positive parts of the day in terms of affect and motivation, whereas it is low in cognitive activity and seldom an occasion of flow. Driving a car, which is the last major component of the maintenance category, is a surprisingly positive part of life. While neutral in terms of happiness and motivation, it requires skill and concentration, and some people experience flow more often while driving than in any other part of their lives. As one would expect, leisure tends to include the more positive experiences of the day. Leisure is when people feel the most motivated, when they say that they want to do whatever they are doing. Yet here too we find some surprises. Passive leisure, which includes media consumption and resting, while it is a motivating and reasonably happy activity, involves little mental focus and rarely produces flow. Socializing, that is, talking with people without much ulterior purpose except the interaction itself, is generally highly positive, even though it seldom involves high mental concentration. Romance and sex provide some of the best moments of the day, but for most people these activities are rather rare, so they fail to make much of a difference in the overall quality of life unless they are embedded in a context of an enduring relationship that provides emotional and intellectual rewards as well. Active leisure is another source of extremely positive experiences. When people do a hobby, get involved in exercise, play a musical instrument, or go out to a movie or restaurant, they tend to be more happy, motivated, concentrated, and more often in flow than in any other part of the day. It's in these contexts that all the various dimensions of experience are most intensely focused and in harmony with each other. It is important to remember, however, that active leisure usually takes up only between a fourth and a fifth of the person's free time, and for many it is vastly overshadowed by the amount of time spent in passive leisure activities, such as watching television. Another way to look at these patterns is to ask which activities are happiest, and which are most motivating. If we do that, we see that happiness is highest when eating, when in active leisure, and when talking with people. It is lowest when working on the job or around the house. Motivation follows a similar pattern, with the addition that passive leisure, which does not make one happy, is something we usually want to do anyway. Concentration is highest on the job, when driving, and in active leisure. These are the activities that during the day require the most mental effort. The same activities also provide the highest rates of flow, and so does socializing with others. When we look at the pattern this way, it again shows that active leisure provides the best experience overall, while housework, personal care, and idling provide the worst. So the first step in improving the quality of life consists in engineering daily activities so that one gets the most rewarding experiences from them. This sounds simple, but the inertia of habit and social pressure are so strong that many people have no idea which components of their lives they actually enjoy and which contribute to stress and depression. Keeping a diary, or reflecting on the past day in the evening, are ways to take stock systematically of the various influences on one's moods. After it's clear which activities produce the high points in one's day, it becomes possible to start experimenting by increasing the frequency of the positive ones and decreasing that of the others. A somewhat extreme example of how this might work was reported by Martin de Vries, a psychiatrist in charge of a large community mental health center in the Netherlands. In his hospital, patients are routinely given the ESM to find out what they do all day, what they think about, and how they feel. One of the patients, a chronic schizophrenic woman who had been hospitalized for over 10 years, showed the usual confused thought patterns and low affect of severe mental pathology. But during the 2 weeks of the ESM study, she reported quite positive moods twice. In both cases, she had been taking care of her fingernails. Thinking that it was worth a try, the staff had a professional manicurist teach her the skills of her trade. The patient took eagerly to the instruction, and she was soon caring for the nails of the rest of the patients. Her disposition changed so drastically that she was released into the community under supervision. She hung a shingle on her door, and within the year, she was self-sufficient. No one knows why paring nails was the challenge this woman needed, and if one interpreted this story psychoanalytically, perhaps no one would want to know. The fact is that for this one person, at this stage in life, being a manicurist allowed at least a pale semblance of flow to enter her life. Professor Fausto Massimini and his staff at the University of Milan, Italy, have also adapted the ESM as a diagnostic tool and use it to tailor-make interventions that by changing the pattern of activities may improve well-being. If a patient is always alone, they find work or volunteer activities that will bring him into social contact. If she is terrified of people, they take her for walks in the crowded streets of the city, or to spectacles and dances. The comforting presence of the therapist in the problematic situation, as opposed to the safe office, often helps to remove the obstacles to the patient's involvement with the activities that improve the quality of their lives. Creative people are especially good at ordering their lives, so that what they do, when, and with whom will enable them to do their best work. If what they need is spontaneity and disorder, then they make sure to have that too. The novelist Richard Stern's description of the rhythms of his daily life is quite typical. He writes, "My guess is that it resembles other people's rhythms. Anybody who does work either has a routine or imposes on his life certain periods in which he can be alone or in which he collaborates. At any rate, he works out a sort of schedule for himself, and this is not simply an external, exoskeletal phenomenon. It seems to me it has much to do with the relationship of your own physiological, hormonal, organic self and its relationship to the world outside. Components can be so ordinary as, do you read the newspaper in the morning? I used to do that years ago, and I stopped for years and years, which altered the rhythm of my day, and so on. One drinks a glass of wine in the evenings at certain times, when the blood sugar's low, and one looks forward to it. And then, of course, those hours in which one works. A major feature of daily rhythms is going in and out of solitude. Over and over, our findings suggest that people get depressed when they are alone, and they revive when they rejoin the company of others. Alone, a person generally reports low happiness, aversive motivation, low concentration, apathy, and an entire string of other negative states, such as passivity, loneliness, detachment, and low self-esteem. Being alone affects most of those individuals that have the fewest resources, those who have been unable to get an education, who are poor, single, or divorced. Pathological states are often invisible as long as the person is with others. They take effect mostly when we are alone. The moods that people diagnosed with chronic depression or with eating disorders experience are indistinguishable from those of healthy people, as long as they are in company and doing something that requires concentration. But when they are alone with nothing to do, their minds begin to be occupied by depressing thoughts, and their consciousness becomes entropic. This is also true, to a less pronounced extent, of everyone else. The reason is that when we have to interact with another person, even a stranger, our attention becomes structured by external demands. The presence of the other imposes goals and provides feedback. Even the simplest interaction, like that of asking another person the correct time, has its own challenges, which we confront with our interpersonal skills. Our tone of voice, a smile, our bearing and demeanor are part of the skills we need in stopping a stranger on the street and making a good impression. In more intimate encounters, the level of both challenges and skills can grow very high. Thus, interactions have many of the characteristics of flow activities, and they certainly require the orderly investment of psychic energy. By contrast, when we are alone with nothing to do, there is no reason to concentrate, and what happens then is that the mind begins to unravel, and soon finds something to worry about. Being with friends provides the most positive experiences. Here, people report being happy, alert, sociable, cheerful, and motivated. This is especially true of teenagers, but it also holds for retired seniors in their 70s and 80s. The importance of friendship on well-being is difficult to overestimate. The quality of life improves immensely when there is at least one other person who is willing to listen to our troubles and to support us emotionally. National surveys find that when someone claims to have 5 or more friends with whom they can discuss important problems, they are 60% more likely to say that they are very happy. Experience while with the family tends to be average, not as good as with friends, not as bad as when alone. But this average is also the result of wide swings. One can get extremely aggravated at home one moment and be thoroughly ecstatic the next. On the job, adults tend to have greater concentration and cognitive involvement, but they are more motivated when at home and are happier there. The same holds true for children in school compared to home. Family members often experience their interactions differently from each other. For instance, when fathers are with their children, they typically report positive moods. So do their children up to grade 5. Afterwards, children report increasingly negative moods when with their fathers, at least until grade 8, after which there are no data available. The strong effects of companionship on the quality of experience suggest that investing psychic energy in relationships is a good way to improve life. Even the passive, superficial conversations at a neighborhood bar can stave off depression. But for real growth, it is necessary to find people whose opinions are interesting and whose conversation is stimulating. A more difficult, but in the long run even more useful skill to acquire is the ability to tolerate solitude and to even enjoy it. Everyday life unfolds in various locations: the home, the car, the office, streets, and restaurants. In addition to activities and companionships, locations also have an effect on the quality of experience. Teenagers, for instance, feel best when they are furthest away from adult supervision, such as in a public park. They feel most constrained in school, in churches, and other places where their behavior must conform to others' expectations. Adults also prefer public places, where they are likely to be with their friends and involved in voluntary leisure activities. This is especially true for women, for whom being out of the house often means a relief from drudgery, whereas for men, being in public is more often related to work and other responsibilities. For many people, driving a car gives the most consistent sense of freedom and control. They call it their thinking machine because while driving they can concentrate on their problems without interruptions, and resolve emotional conflicts in the protective cocoon of their personal vehicle. One Chicago steelworker, whenever his personal problems become too stressful, jumps into his car after work and drives west until he reaches the Mississippi River. He spends a few hours at a picnic site on the banks, watching the silent waters drift by. Then he returns to the car, and by the time he gets home, with the dawn rising over Lake Michigan, he feels at peace. For many families, the car has also become the location for togetherness. At home, parents and children are often dispersed in different rooms, doing different things, when, on an outing in the car, they talk, sing, or play games together. Different rooms of the house also have their peculiar emotional profile, in large part because each is the setting for a different kind of activity. For instance, men report good moods when they are in the basement, whereas women do not, probably because men go to the basement to relax or work on hobbies, whereas their wives are more likely to go there to do the laundry. Women report some of their best moods in the house when they are in the bathroom, where they are relatively free from the demands of the family, and in the kitchen, where they are in control and involved in cooking, which is an activity that is relatively pleasant. Men actually enjoy cooking much more than women, no doubt because they do it less than 1/10 as often, and thus can choose to do it when they feel like it. Although much has been written about how the environment in which one lives affects one's mind, there is actually very little systematic knowledge on this topic. Since time immemorial, artists, scholars, and religious mystics have chosen carefully the surroundings that best allowed serenity and inspiration. Buddhist monks settled down at the sources of the Ganges River. Chinese scholars wrote in pavilions on picturesque islands. Christian monasteries were built on the hills with the best views. In contemporary America, research institutes and corporate R&D laboratories are generally sited among rolling hills, with ducks in the reflecting ponds, or the ocean across the horizon. If we are to trust the reports of creative thinkers and artists, congenial surroundings are often the source of inspiration and creativity. They often echo Franz Liszt's words, which he wrote on romantic Lake Como. I feel that the various features of nature around me provoke an emotional reaction in the depth of my soul, which I have tried to transcribe in music. Manfred Eigen, who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1967, says that some of his most important insights came from winter trips to the Swiss Alps, where he invited colleagues from all over the world to ski and talk about science. If one reads the biographies of physicists like Bohr, Heisenberg, Chandrasekhar, and Bethe, one gets the impression that without hikes in the mountains and the vision of night skies, their science would not have amounted to much. To make a creative change in the quality of experience, it might be useful to experiment with one's surroundings as well as with activities and companions. Outings and vacations help to clear the mind, to change perspectives, to look at one situation with a fresh eye. Taking charge of one's home or office environment, throwing out the excess, redecorating to one's taste, making it personal and psychologically comfortable, could be the first step in reordering one's life. We often hear of how important biorhythms are, and how differently we feel on blue Mondays as compared to weekends. In fact, the way each day is experienced changes considerably from morning to night. Early mornings and late nights are low on many of the positive emotions. Meal times and afternoons are high. The largest changes occur when children leave school and when adults come home from work. Not all the contents of consciousness travel in the same direction. When out with friends in the evening, teenagers report increasing excitement hour after hour, but at the same time they also feel that they are gradually losing control. In addition to these general trends, there are a number of individual differences. Morning persons and night persons relate to time of day in opposite ways. Despite the bad reputation of certain days of the week, on the whole, people seem to experience each day more or less like the next. True, as one would expect, Friday afternoons and Saturdays are marginally better than Sunday evenings and Monday mornings, but the differences are less than one would expect. Much depends on how we plan our time. Sunday mornings can be quite depressing if one has nothing to do, but if we look forward to a scheduled activity or a familiar ritual, such as going to a church service, then it can be a high point of the week. One interesting finding is that people report significantly more physical symptoms, such as headaches and backaches, on weekends and at times when they are not studying or working. Even the pain of women with cancer is tolerable when they are with friends or involved in an activity. It flares up when they are alone with nothing to do. Apparently, when psychic energy is not committed to a definite task, it is easier to notice what goes wrong in our bodies. This fits with what we know about the flow experience. When playing a close tournament, chess players can go for hours without noticing hunger or headache. Athletes in a competition can ignore pain and fatigue until the event is over. When attention is focused, minor aches and pains have no chance to register in consciousness. Again, with time of day, as with the other parameters of life, it's important to find out what rhythms are most congenial to you personally. There is no day or hour that is best for everyone. Reflection helps to identify one's preferences, and experimentation with different alternatives, such as getting up earlier, taking a nap in the afternoon, eating at different times, helps define the best set of options. In all of these examples, we proceeded as if persons were passive objects, whose internal states are affected by what they do, who they are with, where they are, and so forth. While this is true in part, in the last analysis it is not the external conditions that count, but what we make of them. It is perfectly possible to be happy doing housework with nobody around, to be motivated when working, to concentrate when talking to a child. In other words, the excellence of daily life finally depends not on what we do, but on how we do it. Nevertheless, before looking at how one can control the quality of experience directly by transforming information in consciousness, it is important to reflect on the effects that the daily environment, such as the places, people, activities, and times of day, has on us. Even the most accomplished mystic, detached from all influences, will prefer to sit under one particular tree, eat a certain food, and be with one companion rather than another. Most of us are much more responsive to the situations in which we find ourselves. Thus, the first step in improving the quality of life is to pay close attention to what we do every day, and to notice how we feel in different activities, places, times of day, and with different companions. Although the general trends will probably apply also in your case, you'll find yourself happier at mealtimes, and most often in flow when in active leisure. There might be also surprising revelations. It may turn out that you really like being alone, or that you like working more than you thought, or that reading makes you feel better afterwards than watching television, or vice versa on all these counts. There is no law that says we have to experience life in the same way. What is vital is to find out what works out best in your case.